Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Lewis. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. Okay. Close all that down. Okay. I'm just admitting people coming in.
Sounds good.
What I'm going to do is we'll start, and I'll just keep an eye on participants, letting them in.
Okay, sounds good.
So should be able to see my screen.
Yeah, you want me to drive?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sure. Yeah. So you want to share your screen instead?
Yeah, if that works.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm always making a couple of minor changes last minute,
Okay.
so.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. So.
Yeah, I will share. Oh, disabled.
Okay. I'm going to let you share. What do I do? Make you host?
You just do allow sharing.
Oh, that, okay.
To share screen. Allow
Yeah,
to share.
okay, that should work now. In the meantime, welcome everybody. My name is Lewis Hopkins with Securing, and we have Jeff Hare, and we are just in the process of getting organized. Okay. Okay, great. I can see your screen now, Jeff.
Excellent.
All right. Yes. So thank you very much, everybody, for registering and attending. In this session, we're going to be focusing on Oracle's e-business suite application. Okay. So that's for this week. And then next week on the 18th, we're going to be looking at ERP HCM cloud. Okay. So if you're not running e-business suite, this is your chance to drop off now. Like I say, Oracle Cloud applications are next week. But if you are running e-business suite, then this one's for you. This is a session hosted by ERP Risk Advisors and Securing. There is CPE credit available. There will be some polls. But today's session is really centered on the idea of keys to the kingdom, and particularly how to avoid giving your users and processes that kind of capability. So, Jeff, if you want to take things up from here, and let me know when you want the polls up.
That sounds good. Well, welcome everybody. It's a happy Tuesday morning. So I just had my coffee. Hope everybody's bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I've taught on this topic for a very long time. So hopefully we'll get some good interaction. And it was actually really encouraging to see so many people participate in the e-business suite topic. There's obviously a lot of still people on e-business suite, but a lot of our work these days is on organizations that are moving to ERP cloud. So we're happy to see that there's people that are still have interest in the EBS environment. So as Lewis mentioned, Securing the ERP Risk Advisors are putting on this webinar this morning. We do partner together on some service offerings. One in particular is in and around an assessment or scan that can help identify some of the risks we're going to talk about today. We are the the builder of what we call ERP Armor, the rule set related to that. So we have a broad practice in around identifying risk, and have been for a very long time, since like 2005 when we started building our original scanning capabilities and risk-based content to be able to look at the access controls. And we could talk about that as you guys have interest in that. But Lewis is partnering with us on the securing team on the technology behind the scenes, so the two of us together can give you some great data to help you analyze your access control risks. We can certainly talk about that at the end of the session today, if that's of interest. And we do offer that across several ERP systems, not just Oracle applications, but ERP Cloud, NetSuite, JD Edwards, Dynamics, and a few other applications as well. So heart of the matter today is we're going to talk about what we call keys to the kingdom risk. So I define keys to the kingdom as having the ability to override controls. So if we look at IT application controls, or we would talk about overriding IT application controls, as well as having the potential to cause what I would consider financially significant fraud in an organization. So fraud that could rise to the level of a Sarbanes-Oxley significant deficiency or material weakness. And we have seen a couple companies that we've worked with historically, or companies that have asked us for some help this year. We've seen a couple of material weaknesses being granted, unfortunately. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit in the context of the session today, what could lead to that in an EBS environment. And we're going to do a series of a couple of sessions coming up where we talk about systemic flaws in various different industries. So the audit industry, the system integrator industry, and the ERP software industry that have left gaps, if you will, in the control environments for organizations. So those will be of interest coming up. So we're going to talk about, why is it that, for example, the organizations are still subject to material fraud risk or financially significant risk. And I think you'll see that as we go through this topic today. Why is it those gaps haven't been filled in EBS environment? EBS has been around since the early 90s. Certainly has been heavily audited since the Sarbanes-Oxley era has started. And then at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about if you're migrating to ERP Cloud. We do have a working group that we've been helping lead related to some of the challenges that organizations are facing from a security controls perspective. So we've got some comments we can make on that. And then certainly we'll talk about that in more detail coming up in the ERP Cloud session. So the main topics today are these 4 topics, and these are what we would call sensitive access risks in and around e-business suite or keys to the kingdom risks. And the majority of the time, I'm going to talk about the SQL injection or sensitive administrative pages, but I would definitely hit on these other topics as well as we go through the presentation. Before we get too far into this, I think we're going to do our first poll. So from a CPE perspective, go ahead, Lewis, if you want to launch the poll. From a CPE perspective, you have to respond to each of the 3 polls. So we're requiring 3 out of 3 responses, and be a part of the webinar for 50 minutes of the 60 minutes we have planned. So those are the requirements. So the first question here is, we're going to talk about that in a second, but forms that allow SQL injection, also known as sensitive administrative pages. Just this is almost like a pre-poll. Do you understand much about SQL injection risk or sensitive administrative pages? And the answers are a blessing to have, since they allow organizations to fix issues in production. Should be assigned any IT user that needs them. Should probably only be assigned to your DBAs. Are not much of a risk. Those are the 4 options. So if you're interested in CPE, if you just respond, we'll give you about another 30 seconds to respond to make sure we record your response. And then you can close it down in 10, 15 seconds. Lewis, that'd be great.
Okay.
So this concept of SQL injection or sense of administrative pages has been around for a long time. The earliest document that I find related to this dates back to 2007, I think, or 2004. And so I'm going to pull up some documents here that I have from a tracking perspective that talks about a little bit about the history of this. And I can send you these PDFs if you want. But the original version of this document was what's called a secure configuration guide, and actually the 11i version of this was called best practices for securing your e-business suite. When they transitioned from release 11 to release 12 in this document, they rebranded it calling secure configuration guide, and now it's part of the security administration guide or something like that. But we've been tracking this concept since about 2007, and this version, the original 2000, the release 12 version, was released back in 2007. I have an old 11i version of this that I think dates back to 2004. So Oracle has been publishing this document and maintaining it and building upon it for a very long time, even arguably prior to the Sarbanes-Oxley era. So originally, it was originally called the best practices for securing your business suite document, and then it transitioned to secure configuration guide. I'm not sure why they dropped the language of best practices, but as a history lesson on this document, I have this article I published quite a few years ago called "With Oracle, Sometimes You Need to Fill in the Blanks," and part of this document is looking at the history of, so I took screenshots and looking at the history overall of the application. So this has a screenshot of the very first version that I had at the time of the best practices, version 3.0. The original version. Here's my answer to my own question that I found for 11i. Maybe perhaps the first time this was released was around May of 2002. In that early version of the document, they had some guidance related to this. And so the guidance they provided was, I'm just going to read this here, this limiting access to security related forms. It says some forms allow users to modify the e-business suite security setup. Through these forms, users could alter security configuration. Example, grant inappropriate privileges themselves or others. They could assign users, or the guidance is assign users only those responsibilities necessary for them to perform their tasks. And then Appendix A, security setup forms, gave the details of the forms that they identified at the time. So Appendix A on page 45 contains a list of the forms. Consider auditing database tables listed there. I'm going to come back to that. So early on, the version said considering auditing database tables. So they identified a risk, and then they suggested limiting access to who would be granted those through responsibilities. So assign users only those responsibilities necessary for them to perform the task, and then consider auditing database tables listed there. So the second half of this is limit access to forms, allowing SQL entry, and the same kind of comments here. Reduce access. Unfortunately, this feature may be abused. They're acknowledging the risk, and they're saying consider auditing the database tables. So I'm going to talk about what I think is one of the most systemic flaws in the ERP software industry, and I'm going to pick on Oracle a little bit here. So they acknowledged back in early as 2004, potentially, but this may have dated back to their original release of 2002 of this document. And one could argue, being an application company, that they should have been building and tracking those and making recommendations to clients from the very beginning of the time this application was released. So a systemic flaw in the ERP software industry is Oracle has never fixed this gap. So it's 2021 when they're saying consider auditing database tables listed in the appendix. The question you have to ask yourself is, why didn't they build that in the application? Why didn't they fix it? Why didn't they put the auditing in place to enable the tracking of activity, inserts, updates, and deletes under underlying tables? to me, it is unfathomable that as we go through this and have this discussion, it's unfathomable that the core software company is essentially abdicating the risk and the management of identification and management of this risk to their clients. And even as they have, they built solutions that does similar activities. So the CCG and AACG components, which was really done through a purchase of a third-party solution. It was done through in 2007 when they acquired a company called Logical Apps. They had acquired two technologies that effectively does auditing at the database level using triggers. They never pre-built and delivered monitoring of the tables that they're talking about within this document. So unfortunately, there is no out-of-the-box database monitoring or database table monitoring for this risk, which to me is unthinkable. So having said that, I would just tell you, as we have switching a little bit of thought process into ERP Cloud, for those that are moving to ERP Cloud, we've found similar gaps in the lack of audit logs or lack of audit logging for ERP Cloud audit policies. And fortunately, one of the things that Oracle is doing, I think, better in an ERP Cloud environment is trying to be more proactive and open to customer feedback. And that feedback comes through the form of Customer Connect, the Idea Lab, and specifically customers proposing ideas / enhancement requests and then getting people to vote on those. So the last couple of years, we've been very aggressive at logging ideas, at interacting with other organizations in the security and control space, and not only practitioners, but end user organizations. And we are actively recruiting companies to participate in what we call our working group. That working group has identified 100 plus, it's probably closer to 120 ideas, either we've logged or other people have logged, that are in many cases critical gaps, if not significant gaps in terms of risk that we're trying to get Oracle to fill. One I will mention, so if you're familiar with ERP Cloud, just as a little bit of a snippet towards what we're going to talk about in the ERP Cloud session. If you're familiar in ERP Cloud, the concept of audit policy. So Oracle has built in the ability to audit, to turn on tracking or auditing in the application. It's not enabled by default. You have to turn that on as part of the application. I would argue they should already be turned on and automatically logging the activities in ERP Cloud, but you have to enable those. So you enable those through a configuration called audit policies. And the one major huge gap that exists is there's no auditing of the audit policy configuration. So if you turn off an audit policy and turn it back on, there's no evidence in the database, there's no tracking that somebody has turned off those audit policies. So you could fundamentally undermine your entire, the completeness of your audit trails. The audit logs could be turned on for a period of time and then have turned back on at some point, but nope, there's no logging of that, which to me is kind of an unthinkable gap in the way they've built the audit policies. So having said that, tying this back to this topic, we are being very aggressive at trying to get Oracle, and the ideas we've logged there are some of the most supported ideas in the entire history of the Customer Connect and the Idea Lab. And Oracle is finally is addressing those. There's a kind of a poor man's version of the that they've implemented in 21B, and I think they're going to come out with the final solution in 21D. Why is it I tell you that story? Because I go back to EBS and this issue of logging of activities or consider auditing the database tables related to SQL injection forms should have been fixed by Oracle 20 years ago. Should have been fixed as soon as they released this document. They should have put in triggers at the database level or the equivalent of that using log files or something else to provide customers with the ability to monitor the activity within what we're going to find is forms and functions and pages and forms that allow SQL statements to be executed within them, and in some cases, just SQL injection. So having said that, then if I go through this document a little bit more, you can see here the original version of this security setup forms have the form function name, the form name, and the table name. So they gave people the activities that need to be monitored from a sense of access perspective, who has access to these. We have built this into our ERP Armor library, so we regularly test from a sense of access perspective who has access to these. And then for an EBS, to the extent that we have helped organizations implement trigger or log-based solutions, we have certainly monitored the tables that have this activity. So sorry, I have a comment here. A lot of issues with my voice getting cut off. I'm not sure if it's just if that's my Wi-Fi or your Wi-Fi. I apologize for that.
Yeah, pretty clear to me, Jeff, so far.
Okay, that's good. All right, so I'm going to keep going through this document a little bit more, so you can see there's Appendix A, there's Appendix B, so there's other functions and tables that should be monitored. And I'm not going to go through this entire document. I'm just going to highlight a couple other things. They took out the name best practices. They transitioned to secure configuration guide. And then part of what we did, why I originally labeled this with Oracle, sometimes you need to fill in the blanks. Part of what we did over time is, as we integrated with trigger-based auditing solutions, products like there's a lot of them in the market, I won't name them, but as we implemented various different solutions, we attempted to fully implement the recommendations. So the recommendations here would be monitoring all these tables. And over time, as we tested this, we found that there's some inaccuracies in the document. There were some gaps. There's some things that need to be monitored that weren't. And ultimately, we ended up finding 3 functions that allow SQL injection above and beyond what they published. Even the last version of this, there was 3 that we identified that they never published. So clearly, as we looked at this, they hadn't put a process in place that did the peer review as they developed the application to make sure if there was additional SQL injection forms, or now they refer to them as sensitive administrative pages, they didn't add those or identify those and or add these to the document. So what we always would say to clients is the secure configuration guide is helpful, but it's and it needs to be complied with, but it's not complete. And in some cases, it's not accurate. And so if you want to look through the whole history of this document, I'm just scrolling through this, and you want to see this. So later versions of this just said you should eliminate or minimize access to the screens, know exactly which users have access. It dropped the language you should be auditing the database tables, which was a very odd thing. I don't know why they would have dropped the recommendation of monitoring the database tables. I mean, that's just seems a strange thing. That's absolutely has to be part of what you should be doing. Here I specifically talk about the gaps in this document. 3 functions that SQL injection aren't included. One table reference was actually a view. You can't put a trigger on a view. So that was that one right there. And table missed from the guidance. There was another one. And so it's interestingly enough, the first time I did a webinar on this topic was with a friend of mine who now works for PwC. In 2008. I've since done multiple webinars. I did a couple webinars with Steve Coase from Integrity, where he demonstrated how this is done. So one of the SQL injection risks is the execution of an operating system script. So taking over an existing account by resetting a password. We showed that on screen in a webinar. I still have both of those webinars up on our YouTube channel. So there's opportunity for you to do some more research on this topic and or share the documents we're providing today, as well as we have I've got a full, I think 2 different webinars we did that are almost an hour, both of those with Steve Coase in a subsequent beyond like 2013, 2015 kind of time frame. So this article will make available to you if you're not familiar with the secure configuration guide, or the security guide as it's called right now. The meta link note is 403.537.1. You can see that here in the upper left-hand corner, 403.537.1. And then there's an appendix that is a different document. So they've broken out the detailed sensitive administrative pages into its own document ID, as opposed to having that. And so now the document ID 1334930.1 is contained and has the detailed references. So let me get to the chase on this one. Let me cut to the chase, and I'm gonna go back to this this article here. So and these are screenshots we pulled in from the webinar, and effectively there are about 75 functions that allow either an execution of a SQL script directly, an execution of execution of a SQL script directly, or SQL injection. So in some cases, you can enter the SQL script and get the system to execute it exactly as it's entered. In some cases, you're using the where clause to be able to insert, so something we would call SQL injection. In this example here, I normally use two examples. One is the alerts form, which is contained in alert manager responsibility, and that has the same options. It has execute a SQL statement script and execute an operating system script. In this case, this is the so the alerts form is something we normally would find only IT users having access to. That would normally go through change control, and you know, like but still the underlying tables have no auditing related to it. So in the alerts form, you could go in, you could enter a SQL statement script, you could have the system execute it fairly easily. You could go back to the alerts form, delete it, and the creation or the insert of this alert, or the modification of an existing alert, and then the deletion or change back of that inserts, updates, and deletes tracking within alerts form. There is no tracking, so there is no tracking within the database, which is inherently what needs to be built through auditing of the database tables. So the second half of this is the execution of an operating system script, and this is an example here in the screenshot of resetting the sysadmin password. So Steve did this through one of the webinars we did, where he had access to this and executed the SQL statement and reset the password. So effectively, between the execution of the SQL script, you can change any data within the database. And then through the execution of an operating system script, you can call any package. In this case, the package that would be most risky would be the package that allows you to reset an application user password. So the ultimate keys to the kingdom risk, as we would see it, is having access to one or more of these SQL injection forms that allow you to change any data in the database through a SQL script, or reset passwords, and a wide variety of other things through executing operating system scripts, or the effect of an operating system script. So anyways, those are contained here in the secure configuration guide. And if you're not familiar with this guide, you should be. If you're in and around managing database controls in general, there's a whole lot of things that Oracle provides. This is just one aspect that's in the secure configuration guide. So you should be familiar with and be documenting compliance on an ongoing basis, and retesting compliance on an ongoing basis, both from an application security perspective and from a cybersecurity perspective, making sure that your application, your tech stack, is hardened on a one-time basis and on an ongoing basis. So let me go back to my slides here. So there's I think there's 75 functions, if I remember correctly. There's 80 plus tables that need to be monitored. So when we are advising clients on building their control environment, not only do we recommend a review to evaluate who has access to these. So that would be step one, is a sensitive access review that would be looking at all the functions and identifying which users have access to one or more of those functions and through what responsibilities. But we'd also then recommend that a trigger or log-based auditing solution be implemented to supplement what Oracle doesn't have in place right now. So they have just what we would call the row who information, which isn't detailed tracking. So all these tables do have an insert value and a last updated by value, but it's only in a scenario where you're changing data, change back scenario, that data isn't recorded in the database. So just the value is stored in the row who information or the database as of the last change. So if I did a change, then change back, it's going to reflect the last change. And then inserts and deletes. If I go in my example of going into the alerts form, inserting, creating a new alert, having the system execute that SQL statement or operating system script, and then going back and deleting that alert, that insert and that delete doesn't exist anywhere in the database. So the right solution in the long run, and going back to Oracle's original guidance on this topic, is to put database tracking or triggers, or it could be a log-based solution as well, that monitors the inserts, updates, and deletes on these 80 plus tables. Now, incidentally, this isn't the only reason to implement a trigger or a log-based auditing solution for EBS. Another reason is change management population. So if you want to monitor change tracking overall and to develop a complete population from a change control perspective, there's about 300 plus tables that should be monitored that don't have tracking of inserts, update, deletes, and deletes on that. So let me ask you the question as it relates to SQL injection. And we'll get to a second polling question here in a second, if we could, Lewis, just be ready for that. But so you have 75 functions that have the ability to do SQL injection that effectively can do exactly the same thing as a database user that has the app's login. So the privileges the database privileges you're assuming through these forms, since it's not restricted, is apps. So the architecture of the way the application works, you're logged in the application server. The application server is connecting to the database server as apps. And that is the Keys to the Kingdom database account. So it has full DML and DDL privileges to every table. It's going to allow inserts, updates, deletes, or selects for that matter, to every table within the application. And then it also has full DDL privileges. So it could effectively, somebody could use the access to be able to drop tables, trunk tables, delete the database, delete tables in the database, change views, whatever you want to do. So the great mystery to me, if you're an auditor from a security perspective, is you have right now you have people that have access to one or more of these functions. The alert manager is a good example of that. The screen I showed earlier was the collection plans form within the quality module. So that's something that is an end user form. There's an advanced pricing form that is typically assigned to end users. So when we run our sensitive access analysis on these 75 functions, because many of them are IT related functions, usually we find every IT user that has more than one or more of those functions, and then we find a bunch of end users that have access to those. And from a privileged access perspective, the organization should review these as a privileged access perspective. And if somebody has access to one or more of these forms that isn't authorized to do everything within these forms, that would be a control violation. So that would be somebody with elevated privileges that's not authorized to be able to have access, or privileged access that's not authorized. The audit response to that, where you find somebody that has highly privileged access, or what organization would assert as privileged access that's unauthorized, is it should require look-back procedures. Look-back procedures ask the question, have they done something with this highly privileged access? Well, the have you done something with it gets back to, are there log files to substantiate or to evaluate what somebody has done with that? So we just talked about there are no log files. There are going to be people in your environment that have access to these functions that are not authorized to change any data, to do full DDL privileges, database definition library, or any insert, update, and delete in the entire database. There's nobody in the organization that would have permission to have the apps log in an unapproved manner in your production environment. So inherently, you have people in the production environment that have unauthorized access to the equivalent of the app's database login, and you have no ability to do look-back procedures. We have a customer we worked with this year that had this exact same scenario where somebody had one SQL injection form. It wasn't all of these. The audit firm stumbled onto it inadvertently because they don't test for these on a regular basis. I would argue if I was advising the IT audit groups in the Big Four, anybody that's doing external audits, and I have in some cases advised them, and I've trained some of the tier 2 firms in these risks as well. I would say you have to be auditing against these functions as part of your sensitive access testing or access control testing. If you don't, your audit plan is incomplete, and you're going to find people have unauthorized access, and there's not going to be logs. And in the case of the client we worked with, we were brought in to try to do look-back procedures to help get them out of a control deficiency. The end result of what happened to them this year was they got a material weakness over this topic. And what had happened was in the original implementation back in 2006, the one of the forms was exposed that allows SQL injection. And neither the client nor the auditor had identified that to this point. It had never been tested. So 15 years subject pat beyond the implementation. They implemented 2006, 2021, actually the end of 2020, some identified this, in that identification and the inability to do look-back procedures caused them a material weakness. I will argue that these 75 functions, if audit firms wanted to come in and run a sensitive access review in your environment, they would find people have unauthorized access. You would not have the proper logging, and their only conclusion as of that point would be to come to would be to give you a material weakness from a Sarbanes-Oxley perspective. So I can make the argument that this risk, since Oracle has never addressed it, since most organizations don't have the proper monitoring in place, it's really the monitoring issue, because you can't really perform look-back procedures. If you have people that have access, unauthorized access, and you could do full look-back procedures to identify they haven't done something, then that would not be a material weakness. But the fact is that most organizations don't have logging on all these tables, and they have unauthorized access. I can argue that virtually every public company right now is subject to potentially getting material weakness if their audit firms just woke up and said, "Oh, we should be auditing this." So this is definitely a keys to the kingdom risk. It is full insert, update, delete against every table, and it's full DDL access to every table, and or it can allow somebody to take over existing end users, reset their passwords, and multiple end users, and do the work as if it's them. So in some cases, organizations will say, we have controls over supplier master maintenance. And I would, in some controls may be adequate in certain areas like supplier master maintenance we'll talk about. But sometimes we'll find a control that says, we're going to look at everybody that has, that would not be an approved user of supplier master. So they have authorized access to supplier master. We're going to exclude those because we're going to assume those people did only activity that were authorized. So the control could be written that way. Anyways, I'm going to pause for a second, and we'll do our second poll. Lewis, if you're ready. So we're going to talk about this next, the ability to maintain vendors. This is kind of a pre-test. How do you see supplier master maintenance or maintaining, setting up new vendors, or, and when this poll comes back, Lewis, let's go ahead and show the results on this one. So we'll give you about 30 seconds to respond to this. And so I'm curious how your organization addresses this. Is vendor maintenance done by AP? Is vendor maintenance done by purchasing? Or is it segregated from AP and purchasing? Or maybe none of the above, maybe you have both AP and purchasing, or maybe a different group like treasury maintaining this. So I'll give you about 30 seconds on this topic. All right, so I'm not sure if you're getting back good data on this.
Yeah. Let's end.
Go ahead and close that poll, and can you publish it?
Yeah. Can you see that?
So yeah, perfect. We would make the argument that supplier master maintenance should be segregated from AP and purchasing. So we would say C is the right answer. There is fraud risk in have it being done with AP, in particular with people that do invoice entry processes, and there's fraud risk certainly on the purchasing side if you can set up a supplier and enter PO. I'm not going to go into a lot of that detail. If you want to know kind of some details on how we view that and why we view that, I'm happy to have a separate call on this topic. I could speak probably 10 minutes just on that topic, at least 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, but we'd argue that it should be separated by from both AP and purchasing. So on the SQL injection side, let me just say that SQL injection isn't just an internal threat risk; it is also an external threat risk. If you've deployed your applications outside your firewall, so if you're using something like iSupplier, that may allow an external actor to be able to effectively break in through some deficiencies in the iSupplier portal that would allow them to take over, do exactly what we talked about, is take over highly privileged accounts and have DML and DDL privileges related to that. So there have been known cases. I've got people that I know of known cases that are more of the cybersecurity experts than I am, that have used iSupplier and the gaps within iSupplier to be able to execute fraud. So there would also be ransomware type of risks in this environment as well. So I'm going to move to the next topic, supplier master maintenance. Actually, before I get to that, I'm going to talk about the fourth topic, which is password resets. Password resets in general, people that have authorized access to reset passwords, or somebody that would have one or more of these forms that allow operating system scripts password resets, would also be a risk. So if I'm resetting a password for the CFO, or I'm resetting a password for somebody that's supplier master maintenance, or I'm resetting a password for a help desk administrator that has access either through, like I said, through like the collection plans form, or through authorized access. So the question I always ask organizations is, a lot of organizations do have kind of spoofing, phishing type of programs where they're trying to encourage people not to click on unauthorized links that are coming in via email. And what they're trying to prevent is somebody giving somebody else outside the organization credentials through a variety of different mechanisms. So a lot of these phishing or spoofing campaigns are done to prevent somebody from getting access to a highly privileged account within their environment. But the same risk exists here. So you have the forms that allow operating system scripts we talked about in SQL injection. And then frankly, you also have people that have the potential to reset passwords through the user's form or through user management, role. But they don't think of somebody gaining access to the ability to reset passwords or resetting passwords through authorized or unauthorized manners in the same way that they would phishing. So like, for example, are people if they come in on a Monday morning, it's been a weekend, they've maybe groggy on Monday morning, don't have a coffee in them, and they go to log in and they can't log in with what they thought was their known password, and so then they go through the self-service password process. Do they report, like, for example, that they thought they had the password, that they knew it, but they didn't, and they reset? So instead of resetting the password, could that have been the fact that they couldn't have logged in? Could that have been an indication that somebody had to reset their password over the weekend and done something with their account? That's the mentality that people need to have as it relates to password resets. Because so it could be somebody from the outside having gained access through Supplier, or it could be somebody that has one or more of these SQL injection forms, or it could be, frankly, somebody that's an authorized user that's in the help desk or security administration that resets passwords. So one of the things we like to see, would like to see in general for EBS, and then on the ERP cloud side or ERP systems in general, is a notification that happens when somebody resets passwords to the user that would say your password has been reset. So if I go in my banking system and I reset my password within seconds of the time I reset my password, I'm getting an email that says your password has been reset. If this wasn't you that authorized this, you need to contact so and so. So the banking systems, the websites, that's a standard protocol for high risk areas. And we would argue the most advanced ERP systems, I think NetSuite has this, EBS doesn't, and ERP Cloud doesn't. There's no notification of password resets to the user, so they could be aware of whether or not there's an unauthorized reset of their password. So that's on the EBS side. That would be, you could in theory implement an alert for that. On the ERP Cloud side, we have an enhancement request. Interestingly, not only does that not exist on the ERP Cloud side, this is going to blow your minds, but when an admin resets your password in ERP Cloud and you log in, so they would communicate that password to you, and then you log in as that password, the system doesn't force you to change your password. So you could use the password that the admin did, the security administrator did, to reset your password. And if you didn't reset your password, then the security administrator would know your password forever. So the basic, that functionality that exists in EBS, if somebody resets your password, you go in and you log in as that the first time, then the system forces you to change your password. And that's just standard protocol. If you had a website that did that, for example, you'd expect the same thing. So ERP Cloud, that's a pretty significant gap. So password resets. I bet there's no organization that has, or there's very few organizations that have controls in around password resets or have implemented things like a notification to the person that a password has been reset. Should be part of standard functionality in EBS and ERP Cloud and any other system for that matter. So the next topic I want to talk about, supplier master maintenance. I always argue that supplier master maintenance is the most significant keys to the kingdom fraud risk. If you know of a significant supplier and you can change the name, address, name and or address if it's a vendor that gets paid via check, or if you can change the bank account information, you can commit financially significant fraud. So if they're being paid via EFT or ACH, all you need to do is change the routing number and the account number. In some cases, if you could set up a dummy bank at an existing account with the same routing number, all you have to do is change the account number. So if you know that somebody was paying Amazon or Walmart or another very large supplier on a regular basis, those are more B2C than B2B, but you get my point. They are whoever is a very large supplier in their environment. If you could change the supplier master bank account and the right controls weren't in place, which some organizations have them and some organizations don't, you could commit financially significant fraud. Now we review this topic on an ongoing basis. So almost no matter what our scope is with the client, we always try to drill down on this topic, just because it is such a significant risk. And I would say 90% of the time, if not 95%, we don't find the right controls in place. And the right controls in a very summary form is there needs to be triggers that triggers or logs that are tracking every insert, update, and delete to those key fields: name, address, and supplier bank account. And then somebody independent of the people that are doing the data entry needs to validate that the changes were authorized. And that's a whole 5-10 minute conversation about how the authorization is validated, what information is being used to be able to validate that the changes were authorized, so that it traces back to the customer. We've seen definitely various aspects of fraud in this area, from organizations that have or fraudsters that have sent a dummy letter that looked like it's coming from the organization, so who changed their bank account. There's no validation that they came from a valid source. We have one customer that had $150,000 fraud committed on them that they couldn't recover in that scenario. I'm not going to go through all the details, but in essence, the supplier master maintenance. So at the database level, a lot of organizations would say, well, isn't supplier master maintenance supplier master data encrypted at the database level? The answer to that is no. In EBS and ERP Cloud, neither system is that supplier master data encrypted. It's hashed, and the hashed value, so a separate column in the database is hashed, and that hashed value is what's displayed. So when Oracle transitioned from 11i to R12, they said they encrypted the bank account information. They didn't. Maybe they didn't say that, but that was assumed based upon the way the value was projected into the application tier. The data that is being used to be able to develop the ACH file is unencrypted. And so the risk of supplier master maintenance goes back to SQL injection. If I was a bad actor, I would use one or more of the SQL injection forms or an unsecured database login and change the supplier master behind the scenes. And depending upon how you would, even if you have a trigger-based auditing solution, there's ways to drop the triggers on a temporary basis, or potentially bypass, depending upon what the triggers are doing and how they're built. So supplier master maintenance, definitely, we would consider that something that should always be a sensitive access risk. So from external audit perspective, people should be testing to make sure that the auditor should be testing to make sure that nobody has unauthorized access to supplier master maintenance. That would then force look-back procedures. Yet we don't see supplier master maintenance as being tested on a regular basis from a sensitive access perspective, where we would argue that it should be 100% of all external audits should be looking at that as a material fraud or financially significant fraud risk. Gosh, I'm going to just talk through, running out of time here, and I want to leave 5 minutes for questions. So users, menus, request groups, and roles, really within the context, responsibilities and roles should be in there. Context of developing security, all those changes. Obviously, you can assign a responsibility to somebody through the user's form that they should have access to. You could remove that they shouldn't have access to. You could remove an end date. You could make a change to a menu. You can add a function. You can add a submenu that gives people temporarily or permanently access to something they shouldn't have access to. And I include request groups because of the last topic, development objects, peer review. Are your development objects as they're going in, are they being peer reviewed? Do you have standards as to what development should or should not do for custom objects? We have one customer that had an offshore development and support team that actually developed a request group specifically to allow them to change data. So they had recurring data changes, data fixes that they had to over something in the order management module. And so they developed a object, and it made it through. There was no peer review process, so that was the problem there. And it made it through the development process, and they ended up registering that as a concurrent program, and then granted to the support group as a request group, as part of the request group. So in this case, that the way they developed it was the ability to do any ad hoc SQL statement, exactly the same thing as alerts and other forms, complete SQL injection, any table within the database. And that was an interesting scenario. We helped, again, brought in to do look back procedures for them. And we weren't the ones that were interacting. We weren't the main company. It was another Big Four firm that was brought in that was looking to leverage the work that we did. And somehow this Big Four firm got this company out of a material weakness. And to be honest, when we were brought in, I'm like, there's just no way this is going to avoid a material weakness. And so I don't know how it was avoided. The secret sauce was done that they did, but I would argue that they probably didn't come to the right conclusion on that. Let's put it that way. Third poll, Lewis. Let's do the third poll, then I'll get into Q&A. So I'm gonna. So I've got some slides here. So what did I mention is the single greatest fraud risk for most organizations: SQL injection, ability to modify significant suppliers, bank account data, ability to reset passwords, or none of the above. We're going to, let's see if we have, whoops. So any questions, chat, or Q&A, if you have any questions in particular, you can use the chat function if you want.
Yeah, there's a question here. Question,
Sure.
what about proxy access? Temporary access, user can act on behalf of employee. How do you monitor it? Access to alert function using proxy user access.
So interestingly enough, I did bring up, so I'm assuming that the reference to that is to manage proxies. And so I thought maybe this topic might come up. So if you're 12.2.4 and above, so short version of this, I've got an article that would be good, and that's this article to review. But prior to 12.2.4, organizations didn't inherently have the ability to proxy access to another user. And so proxying is shown through this, and effectively in 12.2.4, the user interface was redeveloped to allow a user to proxy one or more of their responsibilities to another user. And so in this case, you can see, let me just blow this up a little bit. So in this, and this is available to everybody because it's part of the home screen is manage proxies, and that takes you into a form like this. And what you can do is you can grant a user access to all your responsibilities. So the easy answer to this is it should never be allowed. Oracle should never have developed this functionality, and you need to remove the access to it. So you have to do that through personalization of the main home page where it's the links are gone, maybe multiple places where the links are gone. It should never be used. There is never a case in any organization I can see where proxy access should be allowed. It's really bypassing the user provisioning process. And I got in a lot of trouble with Oracle by telling them that this was one of the stupidest things I've ever seen develop in an ERP system. And there's similar access to this, incidentally, in ERP Cloud. We'll talk about that in the next one. But you can monitor this. I think it's the F&D grants table when somebody is assigned a proxy. I think that shows up in the F&D grants table. It's a table that does more than manage proxies, so that you got to really understand and filter that data. But I think that's the easy answer. Is you can monitor that through the F&D grants table.
Okay, somebody else, but what about proxy for training roles and time roles?
Training roles and time roles. It's never. I don't know specifically the scenario for time entry. Why you would not force the user to do their own time entry. So I guess I'd have to understand that, but nonetheless, I would not allow proxy access for that. I guess in theory, if it was targeted to one specific responsibility and you had the risk minimized to just that one responsibility, which you could, but then the proxy access, if in that scenario, I would want it centralized 100%. So that it's not the end user that's granting access, because obviously the end user can grant access to any responsibility, not just the time entry one. But I don't know why you would want to allow somebody to proxy that, like even time entry access.
Okay.
What was the other scenario? Did I miss that one?
Time entry roles and time roles. Yeah.
Yeah, training roles again. I'm not sure what that would be for, but what this allows is an end user to proxy their own access to somebody else, and that's what you're talking about, is a centralization of that. I guess I would potentially I certainly would centralize that. I wouldn't use the existing all user functionality.
Okay.
Any other questions?
None more have come up. Do you want me to end the poll and share it?
Yeah, that's fine. That sounds good.
Okay.
So all of these could be about, or the first three could really be a valid answer. Organizations may look at risk differently, but I would say what I specifically mentioned is the second one. The second one would lead to potentially financially significant fraud, material fraud risk, and that could be done through setting passwords. It could be done through SQL injection. You could argue that both of those are equally important. All right, so we're at time. It's been an hour. If you guys, if anybody wants to have a follow-up call on any of these topics, specifically talking about how this fits in your environment or how these issues are addressed, or if you want to go specifically into one or more topics, or if you want a sensitive access assessment, we could do that for you. That's a paid service that we offer that would identify how many people have access to these keys to the kingdom abilities that we've talked about. And yeah, we're happy to help engage on an ongoing basis. So I think, Lewis, you're going to send a follow-up email with our contact information. So appreciate your time. Is there a guideline document for Oracle that helps segregate, restrict access to sensitive functions? Which EBS environment can be audited? No. I mean, the closest thing to that is some of that. It's in the SQL injection that is in the secure configuration guide. But there's obviously more things beyond that that need to be restricted as part of what we call keys to the kingdom. So that would be, you really need sensitive access analysis, which would be part of our SOD and sensitive access analysis service to be able to test for that. Okay, well, for those that stayed on for all three polls and requested CPE, we'll get that to the next few days. And if you're transitioned to ERP Cloud or are there already and want to attend the ERP Cloud session coming up next week, we look forward to connect with you. We have a couple more topics I think that will be relevant to EBS and all ERP systems in general. So keep your eyes open, and please, when you get the emails coming in, make sure you flag us in your address book so it doesn't come across as spam, and reach out to us with any questions.
Perfect. Thanks,
Have
Jeff.
a great day.
Yeah, thanks for taking that through that today, Jeff. And like I say, we'll be in touch with everybody, especially for the CPE credits. So thanks for staying over a little bit longer, and we'll see you on the next session.
All right, thanks.